What are your thoughts as a psychiatrist, as an addiction expert on like marijuana and the brain and mental health?
Yeah. So actually, can I add one more bit to that last question?
Sure.
So I think that what I would say to people, if marijuana is contributing to your life being poor, how would you even tell? Right? That's the question. The same question that I would ask you, and I would ask them. And if their answer is I don't know, then that's a huge problem because this is something that could be negatively impacting your life, but you may not be able to see it. And so then that becomes really, really tricky. Like, how do you know? Because if it is a problem and it is keeping you stuck, you wouldn't ever be able to see it, which means that you're never going to fix it, which means that your life will continue to stay exactly the way that it is. So usually what it requires is an extended period of sobriety as an experiment. What will happen to your life if you stop marijuana for like 6 months to a year? We're not talking 30 days. We're talking 6 months to a year. And if someone is not able to engage in that experiment, then that is a sign that there's a problem because that's really how long it takes in my experience to really get out of a substance. Now you're asking, what do I think about marijuana? So I think there's a couple things to keep in mind about marijuana. So I think any substance or anything in the world, doesn't matter what it is, has certain good effects and certain bad effects, right? So I know this sounds weird because even working as an addiction psychiatrist, a lot of people are anti-marijuana. There are some studies that show that marijuana can be beneficial. So one study of people who are dependent on opiates found that if you start using marijuana, you can cut your opiate dependency by about 50%. There are some studies, I've had some patients who have been able to use marijuana in a somewhat healthy way to manage, for example, like some aspects of depression or bipolar disorder or anxiety. Some people really find that it can be helpful. I think the challenge is that a lot of the things that people think marijuana do in a negative way is not what I usually see. So some people are worried. They'll say like, oh, like marijuana will make you like stupider and it'll lower your IQ. There's one study, for example, that shows that marijuana is associated with a 4 to 8 point decrease in IQ. But if you say something like that, people will say, but there are lots of very successful people who are super smart who are still using marijuana. Fair enough. There are other studies that show that it doesn't have too much of an effect. So there are a couple of things to keep in mind when it comes to marijuana. The first is that the majority of our studies on marijuana did happen before it was criminalized, at least in the United States, around the 60s and 70s. The marijuana that we get access to today is not the same substance that we got access to 60 years ago because the potency has increased very, very intensely. So the THC concentration, some of these other compounds in it are way more concentrated, so we see a larger effect. So some of the studies that suggest that it's safe, we're talking about, 2 ounces of beer versus 2 ounces of liquor is a very different thing. And marijuana used to be the concentration of beer, and now it's the concentration of like hard liquor. Second thing is that there are a couple of real big problems with marijuana. The first is that it really is a gateway drug. So especially when you start using it in adolescence, one of the biggest problems that I see is that marijuana alters your reward circuitry and your vulnerability to other substances. It sensitizes your dopamine system so that your dopamine system becomes more vulnerable to other addictions. So like you'll actually become more vulnerable to things like video games and stuff like that. And literally like the enjoyment that you get from video games will become altered. The anticipation that you experience will increase. The craving that you will experience will actually intensify. So when you use marijuana, it becomes harder to resist cravings for all other things because it literally alters the chemical structure of your brain and your neurons and stuff in the nucleus accumbens. There's very good evidence for that. So it's not so much the direct effect of marijuana, we'll get to those, but it's that it really makes it gives you a handicap in dealing with other addictive substances. So that's one thing. Okay, so marijuana is not the same concentration. Second thing is it really is a gateway drug in a negative way. The third thing that I really tend to find when I work with people is the reason that marijuana is a problem is not because it's harmful. The reason that marijuana is a problem is because it's helpful. So the hardest patients that I've had to work with as an addiction psychiatrist are not the ones where they use substances and it makes their life wonderful. The hardest cases to kick are when they use substances and it makes their life normal. And this is very true of marijuana. So when I work with people who use marijuana, the hardest cases are not, oh my God, I love marijuana. I love getting high. We're going to like celebrate and have fun and we're going to vibe. It's when I smoke marijuana or when I use marijuana, I get to live life the way that normal people do. I get to live an ordinary life. I get to hang out with people without crippling anxiety. I get to be able to go to sleep at night like other normal human beings. And this is the real challenge. This is why it's so good and why people like it so much is they do detect that it helps with things like social anxiety. It helps with things like sleep. And if you were to ask someone, hey, I'm going to give you two options. One is you can live a life where you don't get to sleep very much and your sleep is crappy and you get to wake up exhausted every day and you don't get to form social connections with people. You don't get to hang out with people. You don't get to date. Or you get to do all of those things. All you have to do is use marijuana. And by the way, it also enhances the pleasure of things like food and video games and sexual activity. Which one would you pick? Right? This is the real challenge, is that it helps people live what they perceive to be normal lives. And in many ways, it does help them live normal lives. So the challenge, though, is that when we start using marijuana to help with those things, it creates other downstream long-term effects. So marijuana may help you fall asleep, but it alters your sleep architecture. It alters your REM sleep. It alters your sleep cycles and makes that sleep less restful. And it also creates other kinds of problems like rebound anxiety. And over time, you develop tolerance. And it's sort of like a double-edged sword is really what I see, which is what makes it so dangerous. And then once you have something that becomes an easy way to fix a problem, then you stop focusing on fixing the problem in a more long-term or healthier way, right? The moment that I use marijuana every night before I go to sleep, sleep hygiene becomes less important. And so the real challenge with marijuana is that it allows you, because it works so well, it actually allows you to propagate unhealthy behaviors. Since it helps me relax and socialize, I don't ever build up my social skills. I don't work on my confidence. I don't go to the gym. I don't learn how to talk to people because the marijuana does everything for me. So marijuana does help. It's just, it's the taking the elevator instead of taking the stairs. So it works in the short term, but over time, it's going to make your life harder.
And is the same true for alcohol? Like, I mean, when I heard you describe like the life of, getting high on marijuana and how you're able to date, have fun, socialize, be with your friends, fall asleep faster, I feel like you're also describing the allure to alcohol as well.
Absolutely. Right. So I think alcohol in some ways, I think is like almost more damaging. So I think we have a much clearer relationship between alcohol usage numbing our emotions, especially things like sadness today, but worsens our mood over the course of the next week and the next month. So I think alcohol in some ways is like worse in the sense that the negative health impacts are quite profound. I don't know how to say this. They're more immediate and they seem to be more potent. But alcohol absolutely can serve as a social lubricant. I've even done like couples counseling where like the reason that these people got married in the first place is because of alcohol. And it's such a foundation for their relationship. Two people with social anxiety get together. They both enjoy drinking. They both have somewhat of a biological predisposition. And then when one of them gets sober later in life because it's causing all kinds of other problems, it really creates problems in their relationship because it is the foundation of some of their relationship, right? For their honeymoon, they're going to go like on a wine tasting thing in Napa Valley and all this kind of stuff. So it's absolutely true for alcohol as well.
Do you think people's lives will get worse faster if they abuse alcohol compared to marijuana?
I mean, that's such a dangerous question, but my gut instinct is yes. Like alcohol will screw up your life. This is just what I've seen as a clinician. This is an anecdotal experience, right? So, I mean, just simple things. So if we look at like, health consequences, it's not just that it'll happen faster, it's that it'll screw you up more. So, hepatic steatosis, liver cirrhosis, drunk driving, alcohol withdrawal can be fatal, whereas like marijuana withdrawal is not fatal. Alcohol intoxication is much more likely to be like physically damaging and can be fatal, whereas marijuana intoxication has a much less likely chance of doing so. So from a cytotoxicity, which means the toxicity to your actual cells, I think that alcohol, I mean, we've got some strong evidence that alcohol in that way is worse. And then all the people who like marijuana listening to this are going to be like, "Yay, I'm in the same. It's okay."
I told you so. No, that's really what I meant, is that I think alcohol will screw your life up more because it's like the argument is always like, well, I've never heard anybody's marriage get ruined because of X, Y, and Z, but alcohol has certainly destroyed marriages, or the driving part, or just the how intense it is. And I think it's like it's so odd to me that it's become so normalized socially, because it's like we wouldn't do the same thing with something like heroin, and heroin and alcohol. I mean, in my opinion, aren't that far apart as far as like the potential dangers of abusing them.
I think you can absolutely make that argument.